His maiden work of 1911, Inquiry into the Good, or Zen no Kenkyu, Nishida takes what he calls pure experience, Junsui Keiken, in which object and subject are not yet distinguished in the experience of reality, to be an originary unifying activity that goes on forming itself to articulate its undifferentiatedness into differentiated terms. Unlike Kantian hylomorphism that begins from the separation of the form and matter of cognition, Nishida here views the determination of the content of experience to be an internal process of self-determination or differentiation into elements. The origin is a dynamic whole, ontologically preceding its articulation into I and it, or subject and object. Nishida characterizes this articulation as a mirroring of the whole while failing to capture its entirety that inevitably exceeds it. What is ontologically prior to the world of articulated or distinguished objects that can be scientifically analyzed and cognized is this dynamic excess engulfing the self and its livid experience. Nishida pursues the metaphor of reflection for this self-formation of the formless in his following works, especially in his 1917 Intuition and Reflection in Self-Awareness. Jukaku ni okeru chokkan to hansei. In terms of self-awareness, jukaku, rather than pure experience, he understands the phenomenal world to be a formation that reflects reality in our awareness, thus self-awareness as the realization of reality. Awareness, kaku, here implies the double sense of realization, as in English, becoming aware and making real. The genitive of in realization of reality is therefore both subjective and objective. The self, ji, in self-awareness is a reflexive expression, meaning not only the human self, but prior to it, true reality that in itself is inexhaustible, undefined, indeterminate. The self-mirroring of that reality in an image limits its broader scope, objectifying and articulating its whole. This process of ongoing realization implies broader context, inclusive of both what becomes explicitly reflected upon and the pre-reflective context, while inevitably failing to exhaust its indeterminate whole. At the basis of awareness and empirical cognition is this self-illuminating mirror, unifying subject and object. Inspired by thinkers like Schopenhauer and Fichte, Nishida describes this self-mirroring reality in terms of the will, or ishi, that unfolds its undifferentiated intuition, chokkan, of immediate experience to its self-differentiating reflections, hansei, articulating that intuition, reconstructing it in the dichotomized terms of subject and object or subject and predicate. The process is ongoing as each reflection becomes the intuited content for further reflection. He grasps the creative a priori behind this dynamism in terms of the absolute will, zettaishi. To picture this, Nishida makes use of Joshua Royce's metaphor of a self-mapping map, a self-referential map that depicts in every detail the area in which the map drawer is drawing it, including the very map that he or she is drawing and the very act of drawing it. The smaller map depicted in the map depicts another map mirroring it, and so forth ad infinitum, perpetually moving towards, but without ever reaching completion. Formlessness forming itself as such is infinite. Royce was inspired by the German mathematician Richard Dedekind's notion of an infinite system, which Nishida understood to mean that, quote, a system is infinite, mugen, when it can reflect itself within itself, unquote. Adding that, quote, in reflective consciousness, making the self an object of thinking can in turn be made an object of thinking, unquote. In Art and Morality, Geishitsu Dotoku of 1923, Nishida will continue this postulation of a transcendental will, choetsuki ishi, that unfolds in formation, bilden, in reformation, upbilden, to constitute the world in various dichotomized terms of knower, known, object, subject, self-thing, and so on. In these early works, Nishida, instead of viewing form and matter or sense, data, and concept as two separate entities, thus seeks to look at the formation of matter from the perspective of a self-forming formlessness, using the metaphor of self-mirroring within a transcendental whole, encompassing its dichotomized terms in its preceding works. Nishida will go on to designate the unarticulated or non-objectifiable source of the self-mirroring, its formlessness, the nothing, mu, or more precisely the absolute nothing, while often characterizing its dynamic self-forming whole as a place, basho, or as a universal, ipansha. In its 1927 volume, From the Working to the Seeing, Hataraku mono kara miru mono e, Nishida formulates his doctrine of an unbounded place that is infinite and undetermined, mugen, wherein everything finite, limited, determined is in place. Directing his attention towards that wherein judicative acts, transcendental acts of determining in propositional form obtain, Nishida conceives of such a place that envelops the whole. In the essay, That Which is Working, Hataraku mono, he reverses Aristotle's founding of judgment on that which becomes the grammatical subject but not the predicate, to found judgment or judicative knowledge instead on the predicate subsuming the subject. As each predicate serving as the place of its subject is itself subsumed as a subject within a broader predicate place, we are led in the transcendental direction towards more and more inclusive predicates, subsuming the more determinate ones, directed away from anything that becomes a propositional subject. We are led towards the place that becomes the predicate, but never a subject. He thematizes this in his following essay, Place, or basho. Each place requires a further place, contextualizing it. And the more inclusive the context, the less determined, the less objectifiable the place. Escaping reduction as neither being nor non-being. Undefinable as anything determinate, the ultimate place is instead nothing. Incorporating his earlier characterization, he depicts it as forming itself by mirroring itself within. Cognition and judgment, that is, the objectification of material and its articulation in propositional form, are founded upon this immanent self-determination of an epistemically and propositionally undeterminable formlessness. From the most concrete but undefinable place, the transcendental predicate place, choidseki jutsugomen, it unfolds into increasingly limited or determined terms as its abstractions. The unreifiable indeterminate place of nothing mirrors itself by determining itself into the determinate beings it situates. Nishida develops this idea further in his work from 1928 to 29, The System of Universals in Self-Awareness, Ipansha no Chikakuteku Taikei, in terms of a system of reflexive auto-realizing universals, unfolding from the world of livid meanings to the world of consciousness, and to the world of propositions concerning individual objects. Moving from the least determined but concrete to the most determined but abstract, in which on the deepest level are all ungrounded upon the absolute nothing, subsuming everything in its indeterminacy. Universals of intelligibility envelop the self-aware self and reflects their own image onto the realm of consciousness, which in turn reflects its own image onto the realm of nature through universals of judgment. In his 1930 work, The Determination of the Nothing in Self-Awareness, Mu no Chikakuteku Gente, he underscores how this process is the self-determination of a nothing, where, quote, there is neither seer nor seen, unquote. The seen, objectified as noema, is not the seeing, but in relation to what is objectified, there is no seer qua being. The origin of seer and seen, mirror and mirror image, subject and object, is in the nothing, enveloping them, whereby the true self-awareness would be when, quote, we lose even the consciousness of self-awareness itself, unquote. What we ordinarily call self-awareness captures in reflexivity only a fleeting shadow of that fuller but less determined context of the self, acting in the world. The world of intelligibility or meaning revealed in the ultimate groundlessness upon the nothing. Contrary to the holomorphic dualism of Kantianism separating form and matter, as well as to Plato's dualism in which kora is a mere receptacle for the imposition of the ideas, formlessness here is self-forming, a self-differentiation of place into, but also from the in-place, the self-articulation of the concrete holistic context into abstracted terms of subject-object, subject-predicate, being, non-being, and so on. As a self-forming formlessness, from here, form here takes its self as matter. This was Nishida's point when he said at the beginning of place that he would like to begin his inquiry not from the assumption of the subject-object relation, but from the idea of self-awareness that mirrors itself within. During the